stream. Wasn't really planning on streaming tonight, but I had a parapraxis or a Freudian slip but we tend to think about Freudian slips as saying one word instead of another, that kind of a thing. But there are many kinds in the work that Freud has that describes the slip. He talks about all these different kinds. You can mishear things. You can do something physically. There are many different forms. So I had one where I thought there was this reading group, and it had occurred to me. I was like, oh, yeah, this is going on. It's Tuesday. I'll go check that out. And I read this thing for it. I blocked off some time. The reading group had ended months ago. So, however, I think it was worthwhile to read the thing that I did, which had something to do with Bartleby the Scrivener, which is a great, if you've never read Bartleby the Scrivener, it's a really excellent short story. You can find it online for free on Gutenberg by Herman Melville, more famous as the author of Moby Dick. It's a great story. It's a story of Wall Street, as he calls it. And the story is told from the perspective of a law clerk. It might describe his position more than that, but something like a law clerk who runs an office of scriveners, which were people who would copy by hand legal documents. And one of these that he hires, his name is Bartleby, and Bartleby, famously, the action of the whole story is that he's just at work. It's a very boring office, and he just asks him to do the duties of his job, mostly to review things that he's copied, at least at the beginning. And Bartleby says his famous phrase, "I would prefer not to." And his boss is upset by this, but doesn't know how to react. So doesn't fire him because he's just like, this is so strange. Can't even bring him. It has no way to process this guy saying that he would just prefer not to do his job. And it gets more and more extreme as the story goes on. And you should read the story if you haven't, because the whole thing is really excellent. And the reading was about how, in a weird way, Bartleby is kind of like a character or figure for our own freedom. Or contingency. Contingency is a way of thinking about freedom. So contingency being something like the ability for something to have been otherwise or to be otherwise. The ability to not be what it is. And I think that's a nice kind of good counterpoint on the day before I actually begin teaching, a good counterpoint to a lot of the messages that we get about what education is for, which is to be all you can be. Become your true self, that kind of a thing. And that's supposed to be the humanistic view of education. Really not a great view. Sentimental, vague. It might be nice to think about something in that same mode as the purpose of education is learning how to not be what you can be. Learning how to not be something. Knowing which options you prefer not to take. So, by this Freudian parapraxis of reading this great piece about Bartleby on a night when there was nobody else around to talk about it, I find myself with some additional time that I had prepared to talk to somebody. So I decided that the universe was calling me right here to Twitch. The universe is funny sometimes like that. Well, welcome back to the stream. Just talking about how I ended up here tonight, kind of by accident. I mean, I turned it on, didn't I? So I'm calling this an Argument Doctor stream. So if you've been here before, you might know this format. I've done it a few times. And broadly speaking, the format is you give me an argument. Don't think about it as like a fight, but something, an idea that's coming up a lot in your life. We'll try to make it better for you, either by thinking of, well, what are maybe the problems with it from people who might disagree with you, or why do people feel the way they do if they disagree with you? Where might they be coming from? Anything like that. We'll just talk about it. But really, it's just a conversational format where we can chat about whatever is on your mind. If you're in the chat, you are the chat. Be the chat that you can be. Or, as I was just saying, we might think about even being in the chat as a kind of exercise of your Bartleby-like potentiality, because you can choose not to chat even though you are the chat. And that's kind of what Bartleby is all about, preferring not to. So you can also do that, and that's totally fine. That's very welcome here. But if you choose to do that, I'll just keep talking about things like Bartleby. So yeah, check out Bartleby. It's a great story by Herman Melville. He's famous for mostly seafaring stories beyond Moby Dick, like Billy Budd and those kinds of stories, and those are great too. So Bartleby is kind of surprising, because if you're used to somebody doing one kind of a thing, if you expect a Herman Melville story to be on the sea or something like that, it's strange that it's this story of an office. It's like it's kind of like, if you know the movie Office Space, it's the proto Office Space, except that instead of embezzling money, he just doesn't do any work. Just doesn't do anything. Eventually, he does some stuff, and then he stops doing anything. He prefers not to do anything. So, but I am going to work tomorrow, and I'm looking forward to that, to do more of this kind of a thing, and get paid for it, which is crazy. I'm pretty lucky in that respect, to talk and think about rhetoric with students and see how they think about it. These kinds of questions. How do you persuade people? There's a big one. How do you win friends and influence people? That's one that sometimes people come in with, based on that Dale Carnegie book. More than once, I've lived with somebody who gets really excited by this idea of rhetoric, and then I find them reading, they went to the library or Barnes & Noble, and I find them reading the Dale Carnegie book. I'm like, okay, how to win friends and influence people. That's one way to look at it. It might be kind of instrumental in that way, to instrumentalize what rhetoric does. It's very direct. I think it's more interesting to think about it as a kind of inquiry, a kind of a way of looking into things, trying to understand them as meanings rather than things. And because they're meanings, they're not just meanings for you, they're meanings for anybody. So they might be very different. The world that you're looking at, not in terms of its existence maybe, but in terms of its meaning, is a very different world than the world of other people. What things mean to them might be different. So on one hand, that can be very shocking and disconcerting. Be like, oh my God, I'm alone in the universe. Oh my gosh. But at the same time, there's a possibility that there are other universes, which can be exciting. You could look at it that way. Be like an explorer of universes, of meaning, how other points of view, other worldviews understand the world. You gain another point of view from understanding that. But also, we're not just alone in the universe. We can talk about how the world looks to us, and we can change the views of others and our own views through communication. That's an amazing, exciting part of life. One that, nevertheless, often appears to us in moments of frustration and anxiety. Why don't they understand what I'm trying to talk about? Why are they taking horse paste? These moments where it seems like other people are just so seeing it the wrong way, not the right way. So it can also help with that. But I think usually the way that it helps with it is it kind of changes our sense of what the problem is. That these problems of communication are really deep problems. They're not the kind of problem that you can kind of go in and fix with a single kind of tool. You have a leaky faucet, like, oh, it's the O-ring. The O-ring's a little rusted out, gotta replace it. Figured it out, done. And that can be very satisfying, those kinds of things. Tasks, you might call those. Tasks are activities where the goal is discrete, and the process to get to the goal is clear and discrete as well. You just have to do it. You have to know how to do it. I'm not saying it's easy. Tasks can be very laborious, but a task is discrete. Now, there's all these other kinds of activity where you're like, I would like to have a good time. That's not a task, not just because it's not laborious. It's not a task because it's not clear how to have a good time. Or I want to tell someone what they mean to me. That's an activity. It's practical, but it kind of depends on who that person is and how you're feeling and what kinds of understanding you have. It's really contingent, like Bartleby. It's contingent in the way that it could be otherwise, and in that sense of how many otherwise ways the world might appear to others, we come to understand a lot about ourselves too, and what we want from life might change in light of that experience of kind of really putting yourself fully in that experience of how other people interpret the world. It doesn't mean that you then get some kind of high vantage point, which you can look down on all the views of others and say, yes, I see them all. Like no, you don't master them. You don't come to know them. You become aware of them. You become aware of how much you don't know. It becomes very uncertain, but also very exciting. Very exciting. Potentially. So it could be tragic, it could be comic, it could be novelistic. There are many ways that might appear to you at different moments in your life, different circumstances. That's one of the things about this whole process of rhetoric. The world comes to mean things, and so even the way that it comes to mean things might change for you during your life. But anyway, I'm interested in how you see the world. That's all to say. I'm interested in how you see the world, what's going on with you, what kind of things are appearing in your world, making it stick out, because I'm an explorer. That's kind of that's the role I'm playing. I guess like in a role-playing game, you might have the paladin or the... I need to know more than one of these categories. The rogue, something like that. I don't know if there is a category for the explorer, but that would be like one of these things. Just a mode that you could choose, a Tao, a way, through all of this plurality of meaning that comes with living in a world with other people. Sartre, the French existentialist philosopher, has a famous line in one of his plays. He wrote plays and novels in addition to writing giant tomes of philosophy. And one of these is called Huis Clos, it's translated as No Exit in English. And the famous line is, hell is other people. Ooh, that's kind of rough. So these people find themselves in hell, and it's just a room with some other randos, some internet randos, some Twitch randos. Hell is chat, you might say. And that perspective, that it's just like, if you had nothing but that forever, I mean, wouldn't that be hell? Just chat? You want it to go somewhere. But the thing is, it's also heaven. It's the same thing. So you better learn how to get along with others, because imagine that's what you end up in. You just end up in a room with 3 random other people that have lived at some point. And you're just there forever. What are you going to do? How are you going to relate to that kind of an environment? Well, the thing is, you're already in that environment. And it's not just 3 other people. It's like billions and billions of other people. And not just the people that are living, the people that have lived. And not just the people that have lived, the people that will. And your relationship to all of that is partly something that you can discover, but also partly something you can choose. What do you want to say? What do you have to say? These are the questions that you think about, or that you might come to encounter as an experience when you study rhetoric, which is what this stream and this channel is devoted to. Rhetoric Prof stream, welcome. Welcome, welcome. All are welcome. Come as you are. Don't stay as you are, but come as you are. But yeah. So, I should probably be more prepared for tomorrow than I am. I could say that every day of my life, and it would be true. I could get that written in a big banner and put it over my bed. I should be more prepared for tomorrow. That will always be true. But probably especially true today. There's a lot that I don't know about what's going to happen in the coming days, weeks, months. And I'm looking forward to that, actually. I'm looking forward to not knowing what's going to happen, because there's been a lot of knowing what's going to happen. And it's pretty terrible, pretty miserable. A lot of the same. And punctuated, seasoned with just random catastrophes, and not random in the sense of they have causes, and we might know those causes even. But yeah, I'm looking forward to not knowing for a while. That's going to be nice. But yeah, what's on your mind, Bartleby? What are you doing over there at your desk if you're not doing your homework? In French, it's devoir. Your duties. Do your duties. What a terrible, motivational strategy. This whole idea of duty. Maybe not. Maybe it was very effective for a while. Duty is kind of the opposite of the feeling of contingency. It's the feeling of necessity, but it's moral necessity. Moral necessity. Well, what's on the other side of that necessity? What if you don't do your duty? What's the threat? What's the threat? The moral threat. Well, the moral threat is that you won't be all that you can be. And so this is why, one of the reasons why Bartleby is interesting, because he's like, exactly. Yes. I do not want to be all that I can be. That's an unthinkable, obscene, kind of hellish nightmarescape. I'm ventriloquizing for him, this fictional character. But, yeah. If you were everything that you could be, you'd be all these contradictory things. So better to keep the contradictions as possibilities that you can choose from. That's like freedom. We feel contradictory sometimes because we're experiencing the freedom of what we might be. That feeling of being like, oh, I'm so weird and mixed up. It's like, no, you're full of possibilities. That's great. If you didn't feel weird and mixed up, you felt kind of, you're like, yep, very self-assured, very certain. I know who I am, and everything about my life is clearly set out before me. You might be kind of dull. It might end up being that means you're a dull person. So being a little mixed up and being a little confused about who you are and what you want, I don't think that's a problem, actually. It might be painful. It might be a difficult kind of position to maintain. But it might be also the source of all human creativity and maybe even human freedom coming from that experience and what follows from it. So be a little mixed up. Be a little mixed up. It's okay. It's all right. I've had a lot of conversations recently with people who that theme keeps coming up. Feeling a little mixed up, feeling bad about it. Feeling bad about being confused or uncertain. And I don't want to give the impression that I think that, you can just turn it around in your head, just see it from a different perspective. It's not that easy, obviously. These kinds of things are not just concepts or ideas. We feel them in our bodies. It's what's going on in our life, our material situation, what we really can do and cannot do in terms of all of those other conditions. But that feeling, that kind of strange feeling, is the thing that I want to say. Hold on to that. Even amidst all that bad stuff, it might seem like that feeling is the cause of all the bad stuff that's kind of happening around you in your life. But you might also think about it as that weird feeling is the kind of protest against all that bad stuff, against the kind of single monotone badness in the background of life. That feeling of strange mixture. That's like a protest of saying, no, I'm not that. The reason this feels so bad is that I will never succumb to being that, just being rolled over by all those bad things in life. Those other people who are cruel to me or who misunderstand me, or those people who make it difficult for me to live life the way I want to live it. Or maybe it's not other people. Maybe it's your job, or maybe it's something that's going on with your health, something like that. Even in those situations, that feeling might be protest, a signal of your hope, as opposed to just a feeling of pain. It would be weird, actually, if hope didn't have any pain in it. If hope felt really nice, you wouldn't need to do anything. You'd just be like, let me hope a little bit. The hope's here. Okay, good, I'm good. But hope doesn't feel like that. Hope is kind of like, it's between possibilities. Things might go well, things might not go well. This might be good, this might not be good. So, being hopeful isn't being kind of Pollyanna, rosy glasses, starry-eyed, naive. In fact, I think probably the most naive person is the despairing person. The person who gives up all hope is naive in a very tragic way, where they confuse their feeling of how bad things are with the truth of things. But the truth isn't that simple, ever. It's always worthwhile to have hope, not because things are always going to go well, but because it's better to live with that tension. We want to be a hopeful people, you might say. Or that's, I think, a good thing to be. Let's be hopeful. Why not? So if there's no chat, this is basically a sermon channel. Is what it turns out. So, if you like that, I guess, I would be falling asleep myself. But sometimes, obviously, some people must like preaching. People go and hear preaching. Why do people like preaching? Another, probably the most traditional form of rhetoric, oratory, and then at great length, people will go and say, listen to the preacher. They want to hear the preacher. They want to hear the rabbi. They want to hear the commentary, or maybe it's even they just want to hear a lecture on YouTube. That might be another variation. Maybe they come to Twitch. Why do people want that? Well, I don't think there's just one reason. But the experience of things that, when you're preaching, as the saying goes, when you're preaching to the choir, right, you're not persuading anybody. At least in that simplistic way of saying, you think A, let me tell you why it's not A, it's B. That kind of simplistic idea of persuasion. No. It's articulation. It's the experience of how I feel about the world come back at me and shaped and formed and imagined and made more vivid or made or turned in a certain way so that it's new. And isn't that often what people are looking for? They're kind of just looking for a more vivid sense, a more realized sense, a sense with insight and depth and richness of how they feel about things. They want to resonate with something. So even when someone's changing their mind, they're going towards that feeling of resonating with that articulation of what is and what isn't. And I think a lot of it's not so much the religious doctrine or authority that comes in preaching that people are seeking. It's because that's already there. That's already there. It's that re-articulation, making it real and vivid for others, for yourself, feeling that in the company of others. It's a powerful feeling. It's an important experience, and that's kind of what we're always looking for. So one famous essay by this guy, Richard Weaver, is called Languages Sermonic. So sermo in Latin just means kind of conversational discourse, as opposed to oratio, like oration. It's not like that. It's sermo. It's talk. It's talk. So when he says languages sermonic, what does he mean? Well, you can go read the essay if you're really interested. But if we just took that phrase, we can see that there's layers in it. One way we might say is that language is based on the conversational. That the essence of language isn't like some kind of grand discourse. It's Hey, what you got there? What are you eating? Did you go to the McDonald's? That is the lifeblood and heart of language itself. Everyday speech. The everydayness of speech. Language is sermonic. But at the same time, language is also giving us a sermon. Language has its ideas of what's good and what's bad, what's better and worse. I mean, even the fact that we can make those kinds of distinctions in language, not just the good and bad, but the comparative, the better and the worse, and the superlative, the best and the worst. And oh boy, that superlative is what is in almost every sermon. God is great. God is the greatest, to which there is none greater, you might say. The devil is the worst. The third is the one with the hairy chest. No, that's another song. But anyway, you get the idea that even outside of a religious context, language itself has this kind of belief in it, that there's a best and there's a worst. In all things, you can always kind of split it. And kids are always doing this. Say, well, what's your second favorite color? Creating hierarchies. And what's that etymology in hierarchy? What does that mean? Hieros means the holy. So the hierarchy is the kind of this order of angels. There's all these like little ranks and files, even in the realm of the best. You can never get away from all the hierarchization. And that's coming from language. Language has its sermon to tell. The thing is, sometimes we might want to say back to the preacher, even if the preacher's language, I think you got it wrong there, buddy. Sometimes the choir claps back, hopefully in rhythm. It's the choir after all. But it is possible for the choir to disagree. And that's another thing that's interesting about rhetoric, which is it's based on the resources of language as in its present state. Present, whatever we mean by that. It's a dodgy way of thinking about it. It's addressed to some audience of presumably real people, even though we always imagine them, even when they're right in front of us, and especially when they're not. But yeah, so nevertheless, we can change language. Languages change. If language is sermonic in that sense, if it's made up of everyday speech, if we change the way that we speak every day, we're not just changing that interaction, we're kind of creating a resource in that thing that lives only between people in community over long periods of time, the thing that's language. No one person ever invented a language. You can't have a language in private. Languages are communicable, like viruses. Ugh. Sometimes it feels that way, doesn't it? Oh man, I wish they'd just shut up. But we also shouldn't confuse language with speech, with just moments of language being enacted by individuals. Because of course the individuals can use language for lots of different purposes that they have, and language has its own purposes that it's kind of working through them. Is it parasitic or symbiotic? Well, depends on the interaction. But language is kind of this alien from outer space that lives out there in the world that is different from us. But we do have some kind of way of shaping it, which is if we speak in our everyday manner differently, or if we extend our sense of our language, we build of our vocabulary, we attend to the way that others speak, we go to the history of our language, we learn another language. All of these kinds of things can be parts of shaping that public language in a way. So while speech is not language, every speech, you might think about it as a kind of changing of language, of the whole language. Every time someone speaks English, they kind of change what English is. How much do you want to change it? What do you want to change it into? And why should we be concerned at all about the language in general? Who cares? People are going to say what they're going to say, right? Well, you ever had the experience where maybe you started saying something and then you heard everyone saying it? What's that word that everyone keeps saying? River dance? Caveat? Huh? Why do I keep hearing that all of a sudden everywhere? Sometimes it happens at the level of a word. You kind of hear it, and then maybe you even find yourself using it. There's that weird uncanny moment where like, oh, am I saying that just because somebody else said it? Sometimes it's beyond just a word. Sometimes it's a phrase. Sometimes it's an idea. Sometimes it's an argument. Perhaps it's a whole theory, an ordered set of ideas, a religion, a political view, a Weltanschauung, a way of looking at all of life. So from a word to that, it's kind of on a continuum, I think. That generally, how do we pick those things up? Well, we kind of hear them. We start finding a groove in them, some of them, that we have an affinity to, and we start saying them. Usually persuasion doesn't kind of happen on stage, where there's an orator who gets up at the pulpit, makes a brilliant argument, and the audience claps and they say, wow, my mind's so changed. I mean, I'm sure that happens, but that's got to be the exception, and maybe not even something that desirable. I feel like most often how persuasion happens is an idea gets put out there, and as it circulates, some vibration of it starts getting picked up and echoed. And then the echo grows. That's really, I think, more what persuasion looks like, at least today, especially today. So you might think about it then that when you speak, you're kind of putting out a possibility for an echo. Every time you speak, you're putting out a possibility for an echo. What kind of echoes do you want to make? This is maybe as important, maybe even more important than what do you want to say in the moment. Something to think about. And I would say there's a whole tradition of people thinking about that, and that's what I call rhetoric. People thinking about those echoes of language and how they relate to speech and how speech relates to that, how that affects how we live together, how we think, the kind of politics that we get. All of those things are wrapped up in the thinking of rhetoric, as well as its practice. So at this point, I'm just kind of riffing of thinking about things I might say tomorrow, because first day is always an important day. First day kind of sets the tone. Stick with your day ones, as people say. But literally with the day one, stick with your day ones. But you can think about every day as a day one. Might be one kind of attitude or orientation you could take. Okay, every day is a day one. Always a new chance. Or you could take the kind of fatalistic view of never get a second chance to make a first impression. I kind of like maybe a middle road, which is that part comes from the experience of teaching, which is that like the class has a set time, and there's different day ones, even through a day. So if I teach 2 or 3 classes, I have 2 or 3 day ones, and you get to kind of see these moments overlapping, slightly changing through time. I saw someone post a great video from a baseball game of a pitcher throwing I think it was a fastball and then maybe a slider. I forget what the other pitch was. And you could see at a certain point that they put the 2 pitches over top of each other. And you could see at the point which they split. And the batter couldn't get either one of them. Because, I mean, how are you going to... I mean, it's hard to hit a fastball and just alone, much less if it could be a totally different pitch that's coming at a different time. So that's kind of what the day one experience is like for me. All these things are kind of on top of each other, and you can see the moments at which they split apart. And that's a really valuable experience as a teacher, because you start to see like who other people are. You have some idea of what things should be or how things might go, and then things start to diverge. You're like, okay, good, now we're really in it. If it's all a design, if it's all a plan, well, I mean, not only would that just be boring, I don't think that wouldn't be a good way to study language, at least. Language is never like that, even when it's supposed to be. It's never like that. Speech is not like that. No good speech, anyway. That's why one of the reasons it's so hard to listen to someone, even when you know they have a good reason for it, someone just read a speech out. And I was listening to someone recently who was giving an interview, and the person was reading the speech, and one of the reasons the person was reading the speech is they had been wounded and had suffered linguistic disability. speech disability from that and was recovering, and so still relying on this. Yet it still had this kind of there's an awkwardness to the interview because it gave the lie of the interview, because obviously the interviewer was trying to ask the question as if they were asking it in real time. But obviously they had already asked the question. The person had written responses. So it gave you this sense of like, oh, what kind of time are we really in? Are we in the time of like, we're talking to one another? Or are we in the time of writing where things have already happened and now they're just kind of being rehearsed? Back to Bartleby the Scrivener. It's just the copying of the document that's already been signed. You're just making a copy. So that's not to put down this. What this person was saying was really amazing, and kind of remembering how layered being a speaker can be with things like disability, I think is really important. But I think it's also brings out the kind of strangeness of listening to someone read as if they're speaking, as if that is speech. It's really very obviously not. And that's because it sounds like a different time. And it is a different time. So even though it's happening in the same time frame, same 5 minutes maybe, one is happening now and one has already happened. You can hear it and how it sounds. It's a strange experience. Yeah. What do you think, chat? It's so weird that I thought that this was happening tonight, this reading group. Ended months ago. My sense of time, speaking of sense of time, long periods of time, extremely off. And a lot of people have said this, so I know I'm not the only one experiencing this, but getting years wrong. Be like, that happened 2 years ago? No, it happened a year ago. Big stretches. Not missing, actually. I'm kind of adding stretches in. I'm adding in a year that didn't happen. Like it's all, like the year doubled itself. That's the experience that I have had, which is very counterintuitive. Why would that be that particular parapraxis? Why is the year doubled? Seems like you would want to forget it. I don't know. I don't really know why that keeps happening to me, but hopefully it doesn't affect my Google Calendar or something where I'll miss a plane because I'm like, oh no, is this 2022? 2021? Oops. Hopefully that doesn't get that bad, but so far it's been fine. Just weird moments of being, wait, when did that happen? Yeah, that experience of things slowing up or slowing down or speeding up. I once had I wouldn't call him a friend of mine, but an acquaintance. His theory was, it was all about the newness of experience. So for kids, time takes so long because so much of the experiences they're having are new. And as you get older, you've experienced it more. So you're blasé. Yeah, I've seen it. So time just speeds up. Not as much information to process. And I think that's a pretty good theory, and maybe there's experimental evidence to back it up. I don't know. I haven't really looked into it. But I have a different hypothesis, which isn't so much that it's about information processing or something that's that cognitive. I think it has more to do with memory than attention. How time is represented in our memory. Even in the kind of immediate moment. Like memory accompanies perception in this weird way. Yeah, I mean, you're kind of remembering a thing as you're seeing it. Might be one way to think about it. And I think it's less the processing of information, but the kind of vividness of memory. So as your memory starts to weaken as you get older, time seems to be going a lot faster because the time in between memories decays much more. So I guess those are two ways of, one might seem more pessimistic or optimistic, but I'm honestly not sure which one would be more optimistic or more pessimistic. The idea that there's so much that's new, that's why time goes slower, or so much is lost, that's why time goes faster. Maybe it's really the same thing, just looked at from two different descriptions, but I don't know. Wonder what you think. Why does time sometimes feel fast and sometimes feel slow when we know it's not any faster or any slower? We know it's not. Absolute physical time, of course, really does change, and we know that now. It's not as absolute as it seems, but not under the kind of conditions that we're talking about. This is a subjective experience of time, where it speeds up and slows down. Ooh, that's the longest movie I've ever seen. It was just 90 minutes of Marina Abramovich staring at someone. So another 90 minutes might have felt faster. Less painful. I have to admit, I'm a little bummed out that this group is not real, that I was hoping to be a part of tonight, because I knew a few people in it. I was like, oh yeah, I get to see them again. Next time, it'll reoccur. It'll come around the bend. But anyway, I feel like I've made up my universal quotient of time spent with this from that. So thank you if you came to this and just listened to me ramble for 40 minutes. That's what you chose to do. So but yeah, I guess I'll close by saying you should really read Bartleby the Scrivener. It's a really good short story, and it's pretty short. It'll take maybe an hour or two, maybe 2 hours. I don't know. I haven't read it in a while, so I'm not sure exactly how long it is, but it's definitely worth it. It has lots of little gems. It's a little older. It's from the 19th century, so but it's not. I don't think the language is it's not so outdated that you wouldn't feel old. It wouldn't feel like Shakespearean or anything like that. So it's worth a shot. And as we were talking about before, one way that you might change your language is to be able to change your own way of speaking. Not a bad way to do that is to test your vocabulary a little bit, push it a little bit further, try to read something out of the ordinary. So you might check that out. And let me know what you think on the next Rhetoric Prof stream. You can also find me on the YouTube channel, which is also called Rhetoric Prof. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for stopping by.